I've been giving some thought to, I suppose, what you might call the right way of living, the correct mode of being, the way to live your life properly. I think that anyone who looks around at human life will probably be able to see that most people, certainly the majority of people, I suppose, simply live according to what you want to do. What is it that you want? Well, you'll go ahead and do that. If I want this, I go and get this. If I want that, I'll go and do that. If I want to sit on the sofa all day and watch the TV and the football, that's what I'll do. Most of us are just led by our wants, our desires, maybe our needs from time to time, and we don't pay much more attention than just that. In fact, that's probably the mode most adopted by, I suppose, children. Something that we learn about right from a very early age. It's just a matter of doing what you want to do. But it doesn't take you very long, particularly when you reach teenage years, to go through to a different stage where you start to think about maybe there are other things I should be doing with my life. Maybe there are other ways of living, other ways of acting and being, and it doesn't take you long before you start to think that there's something that you might do which is better than just doing what you want. The second stage after that, usually, is to move on to doing what you feel is right. Not everybody gets to that stage. In fact, I would say the majority of people probably stay in the stage of just doing what you want. The difficulty is, of course, is that very often what you want to do and what you think you ought to do are two different things. And that often brings you into conflict with the way in which you conduct yourself from day to day. Your wants tell you to do one thing, and what's right tells you to do something different. And that's the eternal problem that human beings find themselves trapped between what you want and what you ought to do. The law of some kind is what is usually the guide, as I've mentioned, the Ten Commandments or Sermon on the Mount, or maybe the writings of Muhammad or Lao Tzu or Confucius or whatever it may be that you find is the perfect encodification of the right. That's something that you want to follow. But it's hard to do so because your wants often pull in a different direction. And also, you often find there's a problem with trying to do the right, because sometimes doing the right isn't always that easy. It may be that if you're telling yourself it's always wrong to steal, for example, what do you do when you're faced with the fact that you're starving or your child is starving and there's a loaf of bread over there which you could take? Well, I suppose the absolutist would say, under no circumstance should you take that because it's not right to do so. But the consequence might well be that your child might starve to death. What do you do then? Well, it's not an easy matter to answer that, but sometimes it takes a jump onto the next level, the level beyond right, into what's true and what is truth. Sometimes you have to ask yourself, what is the purpose of the law and what is the purpose behind it? Sometimes that's called understanding the spirit of the law as opposed to the letter of the law. There's something behind the law which takes you beyond right to what is true and what is appropriate and what is correct in that sense. And sometimes you realize that the law itself doesn't cover every eventuality. The law is a simplification of a very complex world and a very complex set of situations that we find ourselves in. And so sometimes just doing the right won't do. Sometimes you have to look beyond that, and the next stage, as I say, is to move on to doing what is true and what is appropriate and finding what's behind the law. But very often that's not good enough either, and you go on finally to what is good. And I think that must be the final stage of the journey of what is appropriate for you to live your life and how you want to govern yourself. If you can add to the good that's around in the world today, even just by a little bit, if you can just do one small thing to increase the good that's present in the world, If you can just add, for example, something which might reduce the suffering of other people around you, if you could add some kind of benefit, make some kind of contribution, add something which is good, then maybe that's a better way than living, than simply being a kind of duty that you might want to do. So that's the way in which it seems to me that the stages of people work out how to live their lives for the right. You start off doing what you want, you move to what you think is right, then you move to what you think is true and correct, the correct thing to do. And then you move on to what is good, which takes you to a whole new realm. If everyone was to do something which was just adding a little bit of extra goodness to the world, one day at a time, well, no one knows exactly where we would end up. But what I would suggest is we'd end up in a much better place than we are now.